My name is Carrie Ginger, and I am your host of Know Better, Live Best. My guest today is the co-founder of Ross Street Roasting Company. Hear about how Brian Gum began his successful business out of his garage and how it has turned into sourcing coffee beans through his direct trade partner out of Nicaragua. Ross Street Roasting Company's mission is to turn coffee drinkers into coffee lovers. Know Better, Live Best is dedicated to supporting food and health literacy in people of all ages. Our mission is to cut through the misinformation surrounding food, health, and nutrition because we believe that when people know better, they can make the right choices and live their best lives. We are presented by Biteable Foods. They use blockchain and Internet of Things technology to build traceable, transparent food systems because it shouldn't take an investigative journalist to find out where food comes from. Hello, I am here with Brian Gum. Hi, Brian.
Hello.
So we had a nice little chat before this. I'm really interested in coffee as I'm a newer coffee drinker, probably in the last 2 years, maybe, and that's newer to me. So I'm still learning a lot. So I'm excited for this conversation. So you don't just do coffee. I mean, you do coffee. So
Yeah.
tell us about your background a little bit.
Well, I started drinking coffee when I was in my early 20s, and it started out as just kind of this is what people do at the office, and we socialize. So that's why I started drinking it. It wasn't particularly good stuff. It was probably just, regular cheap office coffee.
Right.
And I started drinking slightly better coffee in my mid 20s. And I started, roasting coffee in my mid 30s. So now I'm almost 40. So I've been at least drinking coffee for almost 20 years. And now I've been roasting coffee for almost 5 years, and professionally for 3 years of that. And so, my journey with coffee kind of started somewhat regularly. And within the last 5 years I kind of jumped down the rabbit hole. And what I've discovered is the further you go with coffee, the more interesting it is and the more interesting it can be. All aspects of it you can nerd out on for weeks or years. There are so many aspects of the coffee industry that you could spend an entire career in. And there's a whole bunch of people that drink coffee around the world. And there's a whole bunch of people that grow coffee in coffee growing countries. So it's the perfect nerd's playground. And it's also really fun business to be in because good coffee tends to make people happy.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's fun to be in a business where I'm making people happy. And I enjoy the customer relationship aspect of it, as much as the craft of roasting. So it's just a lot of fun. It's a really great business to be in.
I can only imagine the cool people you meet.
Yeah.
Especially as we get further into your job and your career, places you've traveled, which we'll get into. Mm-hmm. So you started brewing in your garage. Is that correct?
Yeah, we started roasting. I started
roasting.
The first time I roasted was actually in our basement with a popcorn popper. And I did it one early December. It's been almost 5 years ago. And I initially started roasting for Christmas gifts for friends and family for that year. And I just fell in love with it immediately. And I used a popcorn popper that basically, coffee roasting itself is not a lot different than popping popcorn. You take a seed, you heat it up, and it cracks, and that's popcorn. That's coffee. There's a lot more craft involved with it on the coffee side, but at least to start out, it was really as simple as going to the department store here in town and buying a popcorn popper and getting started. And I did that once, and my wife immediately told me to go out into the garage because coffee roasting generates smoke, and that smoke was getting into the rest of the house. And so I did have to go to the garage pretty quickly.
I think I may have asked my husband to do the same thing if that's coming. Yeah. Yep. It's just with grilling, as I make sure I close the door right away because that just comes right in and it affects everyone. And then my younger kids are screaming because they don't like the smell or whatnot and changing. So I can only imagine how important sourcing is to you with your coffee beans.
Yep.
So where did you have some interesting places you source from. How did you come across those places?
When I was a hobby roaster, roasting at home, I had the benefit of being connected with a friend from grad school. My wife and I are both originally from Iowa, but we spent 4 years in Western Virginia for graduate school. And that's where I discovered home roasting. I knew a couple people who were doing it there. And then when we moved back home to Iowa, that's when I just started to roast at home. And so one of those friends happened to have his own little website where he just sold small quantities of unroasted coffee to home roasters. And he spent a lot of time picking out specific coffees from different countries that grow coffee. They were usually like certified organic or fair trade coffees. And so even when I was a home roaster, I kind of started with really high-end, meticulously sourced green coffees, and green coffee is unroasted coffee. So sourcing was important to me even when I was a hobby roaster. And I would say, as I started to progress into commercial roasting, I learned an incredible amount about sourcing coffee through Instagram, believe it or not. The neat thing about Instagram for coffee people is almost everything about coffee, from where it's grown all the way through roasting, brewing it in cool cafes, latte art with, the shapes on the latte drinks, like everything about coffee is photogenic. So it all looks really good on Instagram. Right. And there's a whole bunch of coffee people on Instagram. And so I actually connected with my first direct trade partner through Instagram. It was just kind of, as I was building my Instagram following network, I was following a bunch of accounts when I started mine. He was just a producer in Nicaragua that I happened to come across in Instagram. And we started conversation back and forth. And when I began as a commercial roasting operation, he was the first person that I bought a large quantity of unroasted coffee from. And that was a direct trade purchase right off the bat. And in coffee, you can also, it's more common to work with importing companies. So large companies that have big warehouses that buy coffee from all over the world, bring it into their warehouses, and then sell it to roasters like me. I do use those kinds of sourcing partners for other coffees. The direct trade model is a newer sourcing method that just gets you a closer connection with the producers of the coffee itself. So I've used a mix of those direct trade partners and importing partners. And I mean, even my importing partners give me a lot of traceability information. So even coffee sourced through those importers, I have access to a lot of information for where it was grown, how it was grown, who grew it. And so I feel good about those importer relationships as well. But the direct trade relationships are, it's just that much closer.
So just explain for our listeners, and you were explaining direct trade really well. Just one more time, what exactly is direct trade? Just make sure I get it.
Yeah, you're basically just taking a few middlemen out of the supply chain picture. Coffee is generally produced on small family-sized farms, and then it's generally taken to like a larger organization in a region that kind of pools everybody's coffees together. That coffee gets exported to various countries, including the United States. And if it's an importer, that importer is working with coffee producers all around the world. And so they do a lot of that work on behalf of the roasters. So roasters don't have to develop all these individual relationships with producers in the countries that you want to get coffee from. But if you do want to do direct trade, that's a newer methodology that allows you to basically kind of skip that importer and just go straight to the producer level and say, hey, I'm a roaster in the United States and I want to buy coffee directly from you. And there's different, like even within direct trade, there's kind of varying levels of how direct trade can be. I work with 2 direct trade partners now that basically act as, like the one in Nicaragua, he has the business entity in Nicaragua, and he has a business entity in the United States with the exact same name. And he basically exports to himself in the United States and then sells that coffee that's been imported from himself in Nicaragua. He sells it directly to roasters. So I don't necessarily have to go all the way to the farm and go to that level of direct trade and go to an individual family and say, hey, I want to buy your family's coffee. This guy who's working in Nicaragua is working with his own farm, but also a series of partner farmers in his region. And then he sells his coffee and their coffee directly to roasters.
Oh, nice.
So it's basically how many people you have in the supply chain.
Okay. So yeah, a lot less people you were having to deal with. I mean, I guess good or bad, but you get to know those farmers really well, like you said earlier.
Yeah. Yep. And that relationship with the producer in Nicaragua has lasted for the 3 years that we've been in business. So we just did our 4th purchase for a harvest year. Those coffees just showed up in July, and I'm just getting them rolled out into production. So they're just now getting into coffees that are going to customers, and that's the fourth harvest year that we've purchased for. And my wife and daughter and I went to Nicaragua in March for the first time to visit the producer and visit a few of the farms that have produced coffees for our business. We got to meet a few of the families, which was really interesting because for those coffees, if it's a single farm coffee, he tends to put that family's name on the coffee in the product catalog that gets sent to me. And so some of the families that we met, like on the side of this mountain in Nicaragua, he's like, oh, there's Don Santos. And I'm like, I've heard that name, like
right.
At his coffee, like, and there he is walking down the road. So that was really great. And it's easier to do that level of relationships, those kinds of visits with a direct trade partner. Importing companies also organize trips to coffee growing origins, but they'll get like a bunch of roasters on one trip, and you'll all go over to coffee farms that you may or may not be buying coffee directly from, but you still can visit the farms and all that. So even the importing companies do a good job of connecting roasters more directly with producers. But again, it's just the closeness of the relationship is just that much more present with direct trade connection like that.
Did that change your perspective at all? Or, I mean, probably in a positive way, but when you visited? Yeah,
it did. I have done a lot of homework on coffee growing, processing. Mm-hmm. I've seen a lot of photos from coffee growing countries and videos. But what I didn't have is a sense for how that all fits together in an actual place. And that was probably the biggest learning opportunity for me, is just to be able to see up close how it all fits together as a system. Where the coffee's grown, where it gets taken after it's harvested, where it gets processed and then moved to another processing facility, and all the different steps in that particular, that little piece of geography in Matagalpa, Nicaragua. Like, we got to see it in action.
What a learning experience for you, your wife, and your daughter.
Yeah, it was great.
Just the sights I'm sure you saw outside of that. But when you go to have your cup of coffee, I'm sure all these, thoughts are just a nice way to unwind, and you can really appreciate where it came from.
And the other benefit from that visit for this year was we happened to go, we were there in early March, and the harvest season in Nicaragua had just wrapped up. In that part of Nicaragua had just wrapped up within the last couple weeks. And so freshly picked coffees were just starting to come in. They get them processed, and then they start doing roasting of samples from all of those individual lots that come from the different farms. And part of the work that that trade partner does is they evaluate all of those individual lots that come in, and they have to do quality scoring on all of them. Because in specialty coffee, which is the market segment that we're in, producers get paid based on a quality scale. And to even get sold in specialty coffee, you have to clear like a certain threshold. And then even above that threshold, there's like grades for like, when you're just over that, you can charge about this much because it's that good. The stuff that's a little bit better, you can charge more for, which means the farmers make more. And if farmers produce exceptionally tasting coffees, they can get a lot of money. And so roasters will pay a lot of money. The day we were there, we were helping evaluate. We were probably in the way more than we were actually helping. But it was a learning experience for us. And that's part of what our partner does is when he brings roasters in. So we were able to taste, in 4 hours, we evaluated 50 coffees. And you're smelling and you're tasting. You don't drink all of that coffee. You end up spitting a lot of it out because otherwise you'd be in the hospital.
I was going to say, like, you wouldn't speak right here.
Right. And on that table, that day that we were there was one of the most amazing smelling coffees I'd ever smelled. And I was able to say, like right there on the spot, I want a bag of that. And he said, well, it's one of the expensive ones. I'm like, I don't care. I'll buy one bag of it. I'll buy, I'll buy more bags of the mid-grade stuff, and I'll buy even more bags of the entry grade stuff. But I want one bag of this one right here. I wouldn't have been able to do that had we not been down there. Because some of those exceptional coffees, they only produce like 3 to 5 sacks of coffee, and a sack from Nicaragua of unroasted coffee is generally 150 pounds. And so if you've only got a handful of the really exceptional coffees, you happen to be there right after harvest and smell and taste it, I was able to say, I want one, sell the rest, but I want this one. So that's another benefit that you can get as a roaster. And that makes for a pretty compelling story too. It's like, I hadn't been able to experience their coffees from Nicaragua in that way before. And so it was an amazing experience to be there for that, to taste all these coffees that were really good. But then there was that one that was just like a light bulb, or a lightning bolt coffee moment. Like, oh my goodness, this is amazing.
Well, especially after trying so many. I would think after a while I would have a hard time because like they're all starting to run together, but it had to have been, just amazingly exceptional for you to notice it above all the rest.
Yeah. Yep.
So do you say that, or go ahead.
By the end of the day, like everybody was getting pretty tired, and even the people who do it all the time, you have to stop eventually, because eventually your senses are just like, you get kind of blind. Your nose and your tongue just are like, no more.
Mm-hmm.
But our daughter was with us, and she was 17 at the time, and the process that we were doing is called cupping, because the coffees are in these little cups, and you like use a spoon and you smell them and you sip them. So it's called coffee cupping, and that's what we were doing. And at the end of the day, my daughter took me aside. She's like, "Dad, cupping is stupid. Cupping is work, but roasters like us and our customers who value high quality coffees benefit from all of that really mundane, repetitive, and challenging cupping work that partners like that do."
Oh, absolutely. And now you really got to see that.
Yeah. Like I don't have to taste 50, 100 coffees. Like he can weed those down and say, these are the good stuff. And here's their scores. Here's the flavors that are in each one of these. And so I can look at that catalog and say, yep. Cause I won't go to Nicaragua every single year. And so even though we got to do it this year, we probably won't do it next year. So the fact that they do a lot of that work for us is really helpful.
So I'm curious, so the bag you bought of like the really good coffee,
Mhm.
so is that something you save for like special occasions with coffee when
Yeah.
you drink it, or did you?
I haven't actually rolled it out yet. It's been in my shop since July, and I've done like 3 different test roasts on it. And
Mm-hmm.
especially for a coffee like that, as a roaster, you really want to make sure that you're roasting it the best way that you can roast it. So the amazing flavors that I experienced down in Nicaragua, I can try to get those back out with my equipment and my production process. And I've gotten that phase done, but I haven't actually rolled it out on the website. It is an expensive coffee. Our coffee is more expensive than like even just our regular blends. It's more expensive than most of the stuff you'll find on grocery store shelves.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then a coffee like this is yet more expensive. But it is pretty amazing tasting, and that's kind of the name of the game with specialty coffee. If people are familiar with that market segment, they kind of come to expect the price difference. And when they see those really expensive coffees, they generally know why. And I provide the information that explains why. It's like, okay, here's why this is expensive. One, it's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And two, some of the production costs for certain coffees that end up being exceptional are higher than the production costs for just kind of the more run-of-the-mill coffees. So that's part of the information that I can share as well to help. Because if just like a regular Folgers drinker walks into my shop and sees like a $25 bag of coffee, they're going to be like, "What are you doing?" But I can say, "Okay, here's why," and then you can try it, and then hopefully you'll think it's worth it and you'll buy it.
Right. Well, and I think of it this way: you could go to any coffee shop, just pull through the drive-through, and spend close to $5 just for a cup.
Mhm. Yeah.
So
Yep.
really, if you just skip that step and buy the really good stuff at home,
Yeah.
it probably
Yep.
does end up saving you money in a little bit, depending how many cups of coffee you drink.
Yeah. Yeah. It can.
So we talked a lot about sourcing of the coffee, which I think is extremely interesting.
Yeah.
And we've talked a lot about obviously the different productions and the price, but how does that really affect the quality? Is that just because like the stuff we buy in the grocery store, well, depending,
Mm-hmm.
obviously is not as good and it's a lot cheaper. So you can understand why, but why is it so different? Is it just, it's gone through so many different places or cheaper
Yeah.
places to buy the beans from?
The thing about coffee is like almost every single step that happens along the way from where trees are planted, how trees are cared for, how the coffee cherries, which that's where the coffee beans come from. They're cherries on a tree. So coffee beans aren't even really beans, they're seeds. So how those plants are taken care of during the growing season, how ripe those cherries are when they're picked. There's better and worse picking practices that can have pretty dramatic results on quality. To what happens after they're picked, there's so much stuff that happens just on the farms and on the processing mills in origin countries that have dramatic impacts on quality. It's why there's a specialty coffee market, and it's why importers exist to do all of that really hard work. And it's generally those importers who are working with farmers that say, and processing mills that say, okay, if you want to sell specialty coffee, you've got to not grow coffee like you've probably been growing it the past 20, 30 years. You have to do X, Y, Z to boost the quality of your production. And then after it gets all the way to the roaster, there's things that I can do to honor or dishonor that exceptional coffee. Like I can screw it up. Like I could take a great coffee and totally ruin it. That's not what I do. And
Right.
I put a lot of effort into not doing that. And another thing that would impact quality once it gets all the way to the consumer would be the freshness of the coffee. We have in all of our coffees, we have like fresh crop year coffees. So coffees that have just come in within the past year or so. Like the stuff that was picked in Nicaragua in January and February made it to the United States in July, and then it got all the way to me. So that's like a really fresh crop. And then you get some crops that are, a little bit older than that. So the freshness of it when it gets to me is important, but it's also important when I roast it and when that roast gets to a customer. And part of our business model is we are a roast to order coffee roaster. So I don't roast a whole bunch of coffee and then try like crazy to sell it.
Okay.
I sell coffee and I get those orders in, and about 2 times a week, I take those orders, roast the coffee that will fulfill those orders, and then I ship it out fresh. And so that's generally something that you can't find in grocery store coffee. Mm-mm. You have no idea when grocery store coffee was roasted. Almost no large coffee roasters will put when it was roasted on the bag because they don't want you to know.
Right.
And that does make a pretty dramatic difference on quality once it actually gets to the customer. And so fresh roasted coffee, if you get something that's been roasted within the last like 7 to 10 days, it's going to taste like super awesome. And it will taste super awesome up to about a month. And then you'll start to notice some of the intensity of flavors starts to kind of tail off. If you've got if you get a bag of coffee and it lasts you 2 months, at about a week out, it's going to taste amazing. And then it's slowly just going to kind of go down from there. So that's one thing that roasters like me specialize in, is that freshness, because it helps honor the quality of specialty coffee, to have it fresh roasted and delivered to the customer as fast as you can get it.
Well, this is, just fascinating to me. Like I said, I don't know much about coffee in general, but when it comes to traceability and sourcing food, that really is important to me. So It's like, I guess I haven't had the coffee yet, but it really makes a difference. And so it's interesting hearing this. And when I taste different coffees, sometimes I drink it just to drink it.
Yeah.
And I love when I was reading over your things, how you take a coffee drinker into like a coffee lover. Yeah. And I'm like, oh, maybe I found the right website I need to keep looking into. But a question I had, I was looking at your website and it talked a lot about the single origin coffee. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, the way I have the products split out, and this is very common for specialty roasters like us, we break it out into blends and single origin coffees. And single origins are a coffee from a single place. And the level of specificity within single origin can vary. Like right now, I have a Peruvian coffee on the website. And so the level of specificity there applies to almost the whole country, because for that particular coffee, it's lots that were picked in 3 different growing regions across Peru and then blended together for their flavor profile. So that happened before it ever got to me. Like I bought it already like that.
Okay.
But then, so that's probably like the highest level of specificity or the lowest level of specificity for single origin. You can get very, very specific down to the farm level. And so right now, actually we just sold out of it, but we have a single origin direct trade coffee from our partner in Nicaragua, and it was grown on one single farm. So that coffee that I sell to customers came from one farm. But both of those on the website are single origin coffees. And so really the highest, the most vague level you can get with single origin is like at the country level. It's like, this coffee is from Peru. It may be from 3 different places in Peru, but it's from Peru. And I wouldn't get any larger than that. Like I wouldn't say like, oh, this is our South America coffee, or this is our Africa coffee. Like that would cease to make any sense. So those are the single origins. And the other category on the website would be blends. Mm-hmm. And blends are coffees from different origins that are blended together by me and then roasted. And when you roast blends, you're typically roasting them for a particular brewing application. So we have, for instance, 3 different blends that are for drip coffee makers. So for like people at home who just have a regular coffee maker, we have a light roast blend, a medium roast blend, and a dark roast blend. They have names that we made up. and the names of the products don't directly refer to actually where they came from. Some roasters, ourselves included, will, like, I tell people where the coffees and the blends came from. So I still want traceability information for those blended products, even though the product name itself doesn't directly refer to where it came from.
Right.
So our dark roast blend is a 50-50 blend of our two direct trade partners' coffees, the one from Nicaragua and the one from Papua New Guinea. And I say that on the website. And I list who the trade partners were that we bought that from. So even though it's called Bohemian Gothic, this cute name that we came up with, a crow on it, on the website, you have that, you have access to that information. It's like, well, Bohemian Gothic's really good. I like it. I like dark roast. Where did it come from? You can look on the website. It's like, oh, well, that's a direct trade coffee.
Do you get a lot of questions from people? I mean, I know you're pretty open with where your coffee comes from.
Yeah. I mean, the questions that you're asking me are very, very common questions that people ask when they're just getting introduced to this whole world of specialty coffee. I mean, very, very common. And so I've been through I've been through this let's explain specialty coffee to people conversation a lot. I like to think I'm decently good at it. I tend to maybe talk a little too much, provide a little too much information about it because I'm excited about it.
Yeah.
I care about it. But yeah, it's, we do get a lot of questions, and I'm always like I said, I really enjoy the customer relationship that I have with the various people that we work with, whether it's coffee drinkers at home who are buying off our website, or we sell to wholesale partners like coffee shops or even grocery stores. And, we'll do events in grocery stores, like in the Cedar Rapids area, there's a food co-op. And at a food co-op, generally you have customers that care a lot more about quality, freshness, and traceability. So like when we do events at a food co-op, we have conversations like this. People come up and ask those kinds of questions, and it's always fun to share.
I think it's great to hear about other people that are really interested in this. And with the sourcing and the traceability, otherwise you can just go to the grocery store and just pick up whatever's on sale.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Which I've been known to do. But like I said, I'm looking into this, and the coffee world is so interesting to me because it's something that's new. And I'm really trying to reach out, and everything that I consume, what can I learn more about?
Yeah. Yep.
So have been really, and the listeners know this, but I've really been working on like my health and improving my body, just, for obvious reasons. Yeah. So how can, I guess the good stuff, the good coffee, maybe help your health? I don't know if that makes sense to you.
I'm not going to cite any health studies that have been released recently because I would not, I don't pay close enough attention to the health studies that have been released related to coffee. But I will say generally that there have been studies released in recent years about coffee specifically and the health aspects to it. One that I can think of off the top of my head is one study suggested that it increases longevity. And the common theme I read in most of those is coffee is actually good for you. Because that's one thing that, I don't know where this myth came from, but, even when I was a kid, I still heard this. Kids shouldn't drink coffee, it'll stunt your growth. That's not true. It's patently not true. Scientifically false. In some coffee-growing countries, they actually start children as young as 7 drinking coffee to build their own domestic consumption market base. And, caffeine does weird things to children. I was a hyperactive kid, and actually caffeine for hyperactive kids, calms hyper kids down.
Really?
Yeah. And I still experience that a little bit. I have a little bit of adult ADHD going on. And I know in the morning I can be kind of groggy, pretty scatterbrained. And so I've been drinking coffee every day for almost 20 years. So there is a habitual chemical aspect to caffeine that like I keep doing it, and now my body's like, okay, you have to do this. But it's also the case that like in the morning when I'm kind of scattered, I can drink a cup of coffee and it kind of like I get, oh, okay, it'll lock me in and I can kind of focus and get my day going. Now, for somebody like me, I can't overdo it with caffeine. So if I have too much caffeine, then the opposite thing happens, and then I get even more more scatterbrained than I normally would be. So it's and with caffeine specifically, it seems to affect people differently. Like I can't drink coffee after like 2 or 3 p.m. or I won't sleep very well. Some people can drink coffee all the way to like 9, 10 p.m. and then go to sleep like 30 minutes later. And that seems to be about 50-50. And I think it's genetic.
Right.
So there's no such thing as like caffeine tolerance. The more caffeine you drink, the more tolerant you'll be. That doesn't happen. And so you either are tolerant to caffeine and it won't affect your sleep, or you aren't. So for the health aspects of it, you got to consider what caffeine does to you personally. If you're one of the people that it kind of like in the morning, it'll help, but maybe in the afternoon, maybe not such a good idea. Or if you're the person that can drink it all day and you'll be fine. It is an acidic beverage. And so some people with sensitive stomachs, myself included, besides the caffeine, I can't drink a bunch of coffee because it is acidic. And so it'll kind of mess up my stomach if I drink too much of it. So that's another thing to keep in mind with health. Generally keeping things like milk and sugar out of coffee, you maintain what health benefits there are, and you kind of avoid some of the pitfalls of a lot of sugar. Now, I don't sugar shame people with coffee drinks because I will really enjoy like a cold brew coffee with some heavy cream and a little sugar. Like that is A-okay in my book. And like lattes and cappuccinos, of course, have milk or soy milk or milk alternative in them, and add a little bit of sugar to sweeten it up a little bit. But all things in moderation, as always.
Well, right. And like you said, listening to your body, just like it goes back with everything. Pay attention to your body, because like you can't drink it past, like what you said, 2 or 3. I don't drink coffee all day long. I'll have one usually in the morning, and sometimes when I get home from work, like at 4. But I'll never have more than 2 cups. I just haven't tried it, or well, I add things to it, so I don't want to drink that much, like you said, but I'm able to sleep just fine. I actually used to be. This is funny how you mentioned giving kids coffee, how the thought was it stunts their growth, and I totally heard that. But I think it's funny, but we see children drinking like pop can after pop can after pop can, and I'm like, okay, I think and my kids don't drink either, but I think I'd rather see them drinking a cup of coffee, without the extra sugar, not a whole cup, but I think where I'm getting, then these pop cans that all the sugar and everything else, that's also acidic. So it's just, I think it's interesting our perspective sometimes on things. Because I used to have the perspective. I used to drink pop. I'm like, oh, you're a coffee drinker. As I'm drinking something way worse than they're drinking something much better than me. So I just think I just thought it was like really, really interesting.
Right.
So Biteable Foods. So when you first heard about Biteable, what were your initial thoughts? Because traceability and sourcing is already really important to you with your coffee.
I was excited, and to be honest, I haven't had a chance to really dig deep into it yet. But at quick glance, I was talking to Kevin Cutler, and I said, I love the idea of this podcast interview, but I also want to talk about what you're doing with Biteable, because I think it could be interesting to try to integrate that kind of a platform into coffee, because I don't think anybody's really doing that right now. And one of my past careers was in IT. I worked in web development for 10 years before graduate school. And so technology is kind of like my second language. So when I saw that, brain immediately started working on that. I'm like, we could do something there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, just in your, like I said, you're on that path, obviously, without the technology part. And Biteable has that technology piece that can really trace your food so you know exactly where it comes from. But you do that already with the direct trade. In a way, you're letting people know where it comes from. So you know exactly where it comes from. And then I assume your consumers and who's buying from you feels good about it just like you do.
Yep.
Yeah. So you already said that it possibly could, be something that can be done in the coffee industry. How would you see it? Would you use it if it was there for like just your food, like with your family? Would that be something you'd be interested in?
Yeah, it's, when I evaluate pieces of tech like that you can kind of like integrate into existing practices in your daily life, my thing is how much overhead is this going to add to like what I do every day?
Right.
And my closest analogy would be like, I like craft beer, and there's this really popular app called Untapped that it's basically like a social network for beer snobs, and like you can check in the different beers that you're drinking and like take pictures of them and put them up there, and the people that you're connected with can see it. It's like that social network part of it. I do it every once in a while, but then at some point I'm like, I'm not going to do this every time I drink a beer, because that's annoying to everybody that's around me. Yeah, it'd be something like, in this case, I look at how it worked on a practical level,
right,
in my daily life, and say, okay, if it's not going to mean I have to get out my phone and look at it every time I eat dinner or whatever.
Right.
That's okay. Like, but if it's something that like when I want to know it and it's available to me, and I can kind of unobtrusively check it out, like that'd be cool.
Right.
That'd be something that I'd be happy to try to participate in as well as a producer.
Right. So back to the coffee. So I found your website, obviously, with Biteable in this podcast, but how can other people find you that are listening? Because the website's really cool. I was on there for a while.
Good. Thank you. I've tried to make sure that we have a pretty decent website, and I generally get good feedback about it. So I'm glad that you think it's well done. And aside from the website, I am very active on social media, especially Instagram and Facebook. Those are probably my two most active social platforms. A little less so on Twitter, but we're also on Twitter. But yeah, and I tend to do a lot of Facebook Live video, not a lot, maybe like one every week or so. I think I've done 2 this week. And I'll talk about some of the same stuff that we're talking about. Like if we have a new coffee, I'll do a video, a Facebook Live video or an Instagram Live video, in addition to like just kind of the regular posts that I put on social media. We have an email newsletter that I try not to spam people with, and I also, part of the fun and the joy of this business for me is like sharing, educating. And so that's what I try to use that email newsletter for, in addition to also selling coffee. Like,
right. Well, yeah.
Let's talk about the cool trip to Nicaragua. And, oh, by the way, we're selling some coffee. Here you go. And so that email newsletter is one that we've grown organically, and it's got a decent number of people on it now. And I send out an email like once or twice a month. So we're, like I said, with my technology background, all of that stuff is really comfortable for me to use, and I do make use of it pretty regularly. Right now, I'm our only employee. I do have investor partners, and so kind of on the back end, we work together as a team. But when it comes to like the public face, sales, production, janitorial work, like it's kind of me at this point, and that includes the social media. And I put a high premium on responsiveness and good communication. And so I will get back to people quickly if I'm asked a question. And, we're still a relatively small company, so there may be a day when there's too many people asking Roaster Brian too many questions. But for now, I'm really easy to get a hold of, and I'll engage with people around questions. Anything about coffee, like where it comes from, how I roast it, how they brew it at home to make it taste really good. Like I'm on board for that conversation any day of the week.
So do you get a lot of questions about maybe they brew or they were making their coffee and it just didn't turn out the way they thought? Did they come back to you to see maybe what they did?
Yeah, I don't get that super frequently, but it does come up every once in a while. And the other thing, it usually comes up with respect to like when people locally, especially, like will come into my shop and I brew them coffee. I use these manual pour over methods, which involve like kind of longer periods of time to brew a cup of coffee, and like, a funny looking kettle and these funny devices. They make really good tasting coffee. And it's happened where like somebody loves the coffee that I made them at the shop. They'll buy a bag and they'll take it home and they'll be like, it didn't quite taste as good. It didn't taste as good as when you're in your shop. And then we can have a conversation. It's like, okay, at home, what are you using to make your coffee? If it's like, the $20 large brand from Walmart or whatever coffee maker, it's like, well, that makes coffee. It may not make it very well. Which is fine if you're okay with that, great. But right. If you want to kind of up your game at home, like we sell some stuff on the website that is intended for people making coffee at home. I have recommendations for stuff that I don't sell, like nicer electric coffee makers that make really good cups of coffee. So yeah, if those kinds of questions come my way, I'll try to help people, up their game on their home coffee setup.
Well, quick question then. So I just have my pot that I make my coffee in. So do you actually recommend upgrading if I'm not that impressed with it, or is it won't change that much? It depends on probably the coffee I'm buying.
Yeah, one of my first customers was my parents, and at the time they had a pod machine, and they just got the little basket that lets you put other people's coffee in the basket that opens and closes, and you can reuse it. So that's kind of how they got around that for the pod machine. And eventually that machine broke, and I told them not to get another one, and they got a different one that makes really good coffee. And those brewers, they do about as good of a cup of coffee as like a normal $30 machine. And so there are better machines out there to brew coffee at home with. And, again, I have recommendations for stuff like that. It's like, right. How much time do you want to spend making coffee? How much money do you want to spend on the coffee maker itself? How much coffee do you brew for people at home? Are you only brewing for yourself, or are you brewing for multiple people? So, I'll kind of work people through that and say, okay, based on all that, how much you want to spend, something like this would be good.
Well, those are great questions to even ask yourself before you even consider it. So I'm going to be talking to my husband tonight, right. And then we'll see. He's just like, no, this pot's great. I'm like, yeah, it works great. And after talking to you, I'm like,
yeah,
we don't love our coffee as much as we'd like to. So we'll be looking into different coffee.
And my big problem with the pod system has been you cannot ensure freshness. You have no idea when that stuff was roasted and how long it's been sitting ground in that package. And then, at least to this point, that packaging is not recyclable, and so it generates a tremendous amount of waste, which environmental sustainability is a pretty important part of our sourcing ethics, and it would extend beyond my roasting to what we actually deliver to consumers. I've been really, like, people have asked me to do the pods, and I'm like, not going to do it while it's the kind of system where I can't ensure freshness and I'm generating a whole bunch of garbage that will not decompose. there are starting to come to market companies that do produce pods that are biodegradable.
Okay.
So that's good.
Yes.
That answers that concern for me. I haven't actually worked with those companies to be able to produce a product like that yet. But, if I ever got pushed hard enough, at least I would have a partner to go to and say, okay, at least they're making stuff that's not going to pollute the earth, more than we already are. So that's good. It still would be a concern on the freshness side. It's like,
right.
If I do that, I have to grind it, and then it's got to sit there. And, the second you grind coffee, we were talking earlier, like right at like a week after it's roasted, it's like perfect up to about a month. That's whole bean coffee. The second you grind the coffee, like you take that window and you shrink it down to about that much. So a couple weeks becomes a couple hours. There's some things you can do to get around that, but that will extend the life of coffee that is pre-ground, but it's still not going to stay fresh as long as like the whole bean coffee.
Right. And I think you can tell just by talking to you, especially here at the end, how you keep just these loyal customers, because you're just transparent yourself, not just your coffee. Like you're on, Facebook Live, which I can't wait to go check some of those out. And you're connecting with the customers. It's you're the one that's giving them the information they need, answering the questions that they have. And I know as a customer, with anything I buy, that's something that means a lot. And especially when you're talking about the environment, that's a huge piece that is so important that you're not willing, at least not at this point, because there's not something that's going to work to start the pods, because it's not worth it. And then it goes back on the freshness, like you just said. Right. And that's really important because you want to produce the quality for your company.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Well, that's awesome. Well, I had a lot of fun chatting with you tonight. Do you have anything else you want to leave with the listeners out there?
I don't think so. I mean, if people are interested in asking me any questions, like I said, I'm easy to get a hold of, and I like talking about coffee, and I love it. So yeah, it's fun.
I learned a ton tonight.
Good.
And hopefully it'll improve my coffee from here on out.
Yeah. Awesome.
Well, thanks so much, Brian. I appreciate you being on.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
See ya.